Last month here in California, we experienced a crisis. The power went out for around 2 million residents of this state. It happened because of capitalism. PG&E, instead of updating its infrastructure, spent money on lobbyists and PR. As a result, they couldn't stop their infrastructure from becoming in danger of catching fire. And this year they started a policy of turning off their electricity operations to reduce the risk of fire lawsuits. I took this picture last month of a local Safeway where this is what it looked like when the power was out. Throughout the rest of the state, it was even, in many other parts of the state, it was even worse than the situation we had here in Northern California, where only the power was off. In the drier parts of the state, not only was the power off, but a lot of people had to deal with unprecedented fires as part of and this whole experience that we've had is part of a trend where California is becoming, in a lot of places, unlivable. As the state's housing crisis correlates with increasingly harsh fires, a lot of people are having to find ways to navigate in a new reality where the situation is not stable. The droughts, the fires, the inequality, and now this factor of this kleptocratic corporation regularly turning off the power. They turned off the power twice in a month, is all contributing to this decline of living standards and this destabilization of our society. This is a global phenomenon. Capitalism is resulting in the decline of living standards, the lack of availability of resources, in the proliferation of war as a result of imperialism, in the acceleration of climate change, and the consequential droughts and shortages of food. And in places like Gaza, where the society is controlled by a government that has an interest in depriving the Palestinian people of resources, and where the resources are decided by a campaign of ethnic hatred, the crisis is worse than most other places. The Gaza situation is reflected upon throughout much of India, throughout Iraq, and even in California, where this situation has been getting increasingly bad in the drought-stricken areas, and where it's going to continue to get worse. The world is facing a transition towards climate apartheid, where the poor suffer the most as climate change accelerates. Then this month in Bolivia, the democratically elected government of the socialist indigenous president Evo Morales was overthrown in a violent US-led coup. And the people who supported Morales have been resisting. Bolivia's worker peasant movement and indigenous movement has mobilized and militantly to rebel against the fascist new government that's been imposed on this country. And this reflects a larger trend where people throughout the third world have been rebelling against the neoliberal US-backed regimes as a result of extreme inequality. The people throughout that region, throughout Latin America and also in Iraq, where which, as I mentioned, is another region that's getting especially bad for the poor because of climate change. Lots of people throughout the global south are resisting. And this tweet is someone who opposes the pro-Morales forces says, urgent, a big group of pro-Morales supporters is marching into the city of La Paz yelling, now yes, civil war. We fear for our safety as these groups are armed with guns and declaring war. Evo Morales, please call on his supporters to stop violence, please. This is what you get when you declare war against indigenous people. This like I said, this reflects a larger trend of people rebelling against the situation that neoliberalism has put them in. People in the proletariat throughout the third world is no longer tolerating their conditions. Why do I tell these two narratives? First, the narrative of declining living standards amid climate change, and then this narrative of resistance throughout the third world, because I want to synthesize our situation. Our situation is that a combination of climate change, of unrestrained hypercapitalism, of imperialism, of expanded corporate power, of the militarization of society, of all the factors behind the crises of the 21st century are driving the world's lower classes into an increasingly desperate situation. But we're seeing in Bolivia and in Chile and in Ecuador and in Haiti and Iraq that people have been finding ways to rise up and resist. And I observe that the end result of people rising up against the conditions that capitalism has put them in is communism, or at least socialism, since socialism is the stepping stone to communism, where the people the proletariat seizes control of the instruments of state power and uses that power to move society towards a totally egalitarian and democratized situation. People have been fighting for communism for over a century, and Russia was the first state to have a socialist revolution. And since then, the ideological counterparts of Lenin, of Marx, of Stalin, have established additional socialist states in spite of the Soviet Union's collapse. In the DPRK, people have the Korean people have fought a war and won against the forces of Japanese imperialism and against the invading United States forces. They endured a genocide 70 years ago, where the U.S., in collaboration with its fascist proxy state in the South, launched a military campaign against the North, wherein around a fourth of the country's population were killed. And since then, they've rebuilt their war-ravaged country and created a society where homelessness has been eliminated, where democracy actually functions in an effective way, despite what you hear in Western headlines. The DPRK is a deeply democratic country where elections regularly take place. These elections have reliable oversight to ensure their accuracy. Power has become increasingly decentralized in the DPRK after Kim Il-sung's death and his subsequent elimination of the position of a president in the DPRK. This society that the socialist Koreans have built has been making such great strides towards expanding healthcare, towards trying to fight hunger, towards expanding both its social safety net and its democratic structure, and the result has been this prosperous vision of modern Pyongyang. Something the same has happened on a larger scale in China, where the people, partly led by Mao, mostly led by the larger worker peasant communist movement, have defeated the Japanese imperialists, have defeated the bourgeoisie of the Chinese bourgeoisie of the mid-20th century, and have since built a society that's in many ways far more advanced than American society, that's leading the fight against climate change, that's militarily and economically expanding itself to the point of almost surpassing the United States, that's expanded its social programs so much that China is close to eliminating poverty. Something similar has happened in Cuba, where the revolutionaries fought against the capitalist dictator Batista, and have created what's been called the world's only sustainable economy, and have created one of the best healthcare systems in the world, and have done all of this while under siege from the U.S. embargo and from the capitalist world at large. The DPRK has had to fight through similar attacks, with the DPRK existing under constant nuclear threat for the last 70 years, and with the DPRK subject to numerous sanctions that perpetuate its hardship. These societies have persevered and done great things in spite of great odds and in spite of extreme violence from the capitalists and the imperialists. I look at what's happened in these places, and I see that we the people, we the proletariat, we who support indigenous rights and who support workers' rights are capable of winning our freedom and building societies that are apart from the capitalist power structure, that don't adhere to imperialism, that don't allow the bourgeoisie to dictate policy. We're capable of building a different type of society, and we're capable of resisting the structure of capitalism and empire. So yes, we're in a vulnerable position right now. The Californians who are subject to our current crises, and the people in Gaza, and the people in India, and the people in Bolivia, yes, we are enduring increasingly hard times, and yes, we are vulnerable to attacks from the capitalists and the imperialists. But the people who built China and the DPRK in Cuba have also had to persevere through great crises, and they've come out on top. The oceans are rising, and so are we. We can rise, we can fight, we can build communism. Let's take this message to heart.